The scout ship fell through the thin atmosphere like a burning stone. Inside the cockpit, G1 gripped the controls with white knuckles as alarms screamed around her. The left engine was gone, torn away by debris from the asteroid field she had barely escaped. The right engine sputtered and died as she watched the fuel indicator drop to 0. She had maybe 30 seconds before impact. The moon's surface rushed up to meet her. Gray dust, endless rocks, and not a single sign of life anywhere. G1 pulled hard on the manual override, forcing the nose up just enough. The ship hit the ground and skipped like a stone on water. Once, twice, 3 times. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Then everything went dark. When G1 woke up, blood trickled down her forehead. Her right arm throbbed with pain, but it moved when she tested it. Nothing broken, probably. She unbuckled herself and stumbled to the back of the ship. The damage was worse than she feared. The water recycler, the single most important piece of equipment for survival, had been crushed when the cargo bay collapsed. She checked her emergency supplies. 3 water pouches, maybe 4 liters total. In this heat, wearing her suit, she would last 3 days if she was lucky. 4 if she barely moved. G1 activated her distress beacon and sat down heavily. Her crew would come looking for her, but they had been 2 weeks away when she started this scouting mission. Even if they received her signal immediately and flew at maximum speed, they would need at least 5 days to reach her. She was going to die here. The first day passed slowly. G1 stayed in the shade of her broken ship and sipped water carefully. She watched the sun move across the black sky. The moon had no atmosphere to speak of, so the stars shone even during the day. It might have been beautiful if she was not dying. On the second day, she saw them. At first, G1 thought the heat was making her see things. Shapes moved in the distance, shimmering in the waves of warmth rising from the rocks. But as they got closer, she realized they were real. Living creatures walking across this dead moon. They stood about as tall as her waist with 4 legs and 2 arms. Their bodies were covered in a hard shell that looked like dark purple stone. Multiple eyes dotted their triangular heads, and their mouths had mandibles that clicked as they moved. They carried tools and bags made from some kind of woven material. G1 had never seen this species before. They were not in any of the databases she knew. The creatures stopped about 20 meters from her ship. They seemed to be talking among themselves, their mandibles clicking in patterns. One of them, slightly larger than the others with cracks in its shell that spoke of great age, stepped forward. It raised one arm, palm open in what G1 hoped was a peaceful gesture. She raised her hand in return. Her throat was too dry to speak properly. The old one approached slowly. Up close, G1 could see that its shell was covered in markings like writing or maybe scars. It reached into a bag at its side and pulled out a container. The container was old, patched many times with different materials. The creature held it out to her. G1's hand shook as she took it. The container was surprisingly heavy. She opened the seal and the smell hit her immediately. Water. Clean, precious water. The container held at least 2 liters. She looked at the old creature. Its multiple eyes watched her steadily. Behind it, the others had stopped clicking. They all stood very still, watching. G1 understood what this meant. On a dead moon like this, water was everything. This was not just help. This was sacrifice. Her training said she should refuse, should not take resources from an unknown species, but her body screamed for the water, and something in the way they stood told her that refusing would be an insult worse than taking. She drank. The water tasted slightly mineral but clean. She forced herself to stop after a few swallows and sealed the container again. She tried to return it, but the old one pushed it back toward her with a firm gesture. Over the next hour, using hand signals and drawings in the dust, they communicated. The creatures called themselves Villani. The old one's name sounded like Thesh when G1 tried to pronounce it. They lived here, mining crystals from deep caves. They had a small colony on the other side of the moon. G1 asked about water. Where did they get it? Thesh's answer, translated through gestures and G1's growing understanding, made her heart sink. They mined ice from deep underground. It took a full week of dangerous work to gather enough water for their clan to survive another week. The container they had given her represented their entire week's collection. She tried to give it back. They refused. Thesh drew in the dust. A figure lying down alone, then other figures coming offering something. In their culture, G1 slowly understood. Leaving someone to die alone was the worst evil possible. Helping the stranded was sacred even if it cost everything. G1 pulled out her emergency kit. She had 3 nutrition bars, a medical pack, and a small solar charger. She offered all of it to them. Thesh accepted the medical supplies after some hesitation, but refused the rest. Through gestures, he made it clear that she needed to stay strong until her people came. For the next 3 days, Thesh visited every morning and evening. He never stayed long. Jiwan realized he was working double shifts in the mines trying to replace the water his clan had given her. She wanted to tell him to stop, but she had no words he could understand. On the 3rd evening, Jiwan activated her helmet camera. She recorded everything. Thesh sitting beside her in the purple dust. The way his shell had cracks that leaked some kind of fluid because he was pushing himself too hard. The careful way he checked that she still had enough water. She asked him through gestures about his world, his home. Thesh's mandibles clicked sadly. He drew in the dust again. A beautiful world with rivers and oceans. Then the rivers drying up, the oceans turning to dust, his people scattering to moons and asteroids. Anywhere they could find a little water and survive one more generation. He drew his people's numbers. Jiwan counted the marks. 50,000, maybe fewer. The Villani were dying slowly, scattered across a dozen worthless rocks, working themselves to death for drops of water. On the 4th day, Jiwan's rescue ship appeared in the sky. She had never been so happy and so sad at the same time. As her crew landed and rushed to help her, she grabbed Thesh's arm. The old Villani had stayed to see her rescued, even though it meant another day away from the mines. Jiwan looked into his many eyes. She had learned a few words of his clicking language. She spoke carefully. "My people will remember this." Thesh's mandibles moved, and what she had learned was a smile. He did not believe her. Why would he? His people were nothing. 50,000 souls on dead rocks that nobody cared about. What could her people do? But as the rescue ship lifted off and Jiwan looked down at the small figure standing in the purple dust, she made a promise to herself. Thesh had given everything to save a stranger. Somehow, some way, humanity would give everything back. The container of water sat in her lap, nearly empty now. She sealed it carefully and held it tight as the moon shrank behind them. This battered, patched container was proof. Proof that kindness existed in the universe. Proof that some beings would sacrifice their future to save a stranger's present. Jiwan did not know yet how she would keep her promise. She only knew that she would spend however long it took to repay this debt. The Villani had offered water to a dying human. Humanity would return rivers to their worlds. The hospital on Earth's orbital station was clean and white, and everything felt wrong to Jiwan. She had been back for 2 weeks, and the doctors said she was fine. Her body had recovered, but every night she dreamed of purple dust and clicking mandibles and an old Villani working himself to death in dark mines. She kept the water container on the table beside her bed. The nurses thought it was strange, but Jiwan did not care. Every time she looked at it, she remembered what she had to do. On her 3rd week back, Jiwan requested a meeting with the Interstellar Aid Council. They made her wait another week, then another. Finally, they gave her 10 minutes during a routine session. The council chamber was huge and mostly empty. 5 representatives sat at a curved desk looking bored. Chairwoman Hyeri, a tired woman with gray hair, gestured for Jiwan to begin. Jiwan told them everything. The crash, the Villani, the water that represented a week of desperate work. She explained how the Villani were dying, scattered across worthless moons, slowly going extinct because their world had died centuries ago. She asked for help, for a terraform mission, for anything. The council members looked at each other. One of them, a man with expensive clothes, actually laughed. "Do you know how many species are struggling in this galaxy? We cannot save them all." "They saved me," Jiwan said quietly. Hyeri leaned forward. Her eyes were kind, but her words were not. "Engineer Jiwan, I understand you feel gratitude. But terraform missions take hundreds of years and more money than most planets produce. The Villani number what, 50,000? They occupy no strategic territory. They produce no valuable resources. I am sorry, but we must focus our efforts where they will do the most good for the most people." "They gave everything," Jiwan said. Her voice shook. "One old Villani gave his clan's entire water supply to save one human. Does that mean nothing?" "It means they are good people," Hyeri said gently. "But good people die every day. We cannot save them all. I am truly sorry." The meeting ended. Jiwan walked out holding the water container so tight her knuckles turned white. For 2 days she sat in her apartment and stared at walls. Then she made a decision. If the council would not listen, she would make everyone listen. Jiwan uploaded her helmet camera footage to the public network. All of it. 3 days of recordings showing Thesh and his people, the moment they offered water. Thesh's cracked shell leaking because he pushed himself too hard. The drawings in the dust showing a dying civilization. She wrote a simple message. They gave everything to save one stranger. What will we give back? The response was immediate and massive. Within 6 hours, the footage had been viewed 1 billion times. Within 12 hours, every news organization in human space was showing it. The image of Thesh, his shell cracked and leaking, holding out that battered water container, became the most recognizable picture in human history. People were angry, not at the Vellani, at themselves, at their governments, at the idea that humanity would accept such kindness and give nothing in return. Protests started on Earth within a day. Thousands of people gathered outside government buildings holding signs. Return the rivers, they said. Pay the debt. We remember Thesh. The protests spread to Mars, to the colony worlds, to the asteroid stations. Everywhere humans lived, they demanded action. Scientists began organizing on their own. Engineers, hydrologists, terraform specialists. They formed a volunteer group and started planning. They said they did not care if the government helped or not. They would find a way. Money poured in from everywhere. Children sent their allowance. Corporations donated millions. Entire cities held fundraising events. Within 2 weeks, the volunteer group had collected enough money to buy 3 ships and supply them for a year. The Interstellar Council called an emergency meeting. This time, Jiwan was not asking for 10 minutes. She was invited as a primary speaker. The chamber was full now. Representatives from every human world. The gallery was packed with press and observers. Hieri looked exhausted. The people have spoken, Hieri said without preamble. They want the Vela Restoration Project. They want us to try to bring the Vellani homeworld back to life. She paused. I must tell you all, the science team estimates this will take 800 years using traditional terraform methods. We do not have the technology to do it faster. A man stood up in the gallery. He was tall and thin with hard eyes. Then we will create the technology. People turned to look at him. Jiwan recognized him from the scientific journals. Daiho, one of the best hydrologists alive, also known for being difficult, aggressive, and completely brilliant. We have been doing terraform work the slow way because we had time, Daiho continued. We did not need to rush. But this is different. The Vellani do not have 800 years. They might not have 80, so we will do it in 5. That is impossible, someone said. Good, Daiho said. I am tired of doing possible things. They are boring. The chamber erupted in noise. Arguments, debates. Some said it could not be done. Others said it had to be tried. Through it all, Hieri sat quietly watching. Finally, she called for order. The council will vote. All in favor of authorizing the Vela Restoration Project with a 5-year deadline and full government support? Every hand went up. Not one person voted against it. Hieri looked at Jiwan. You have your mission, engineer. Do not make us regret this. I will not, Jiwan promised. The next month was chaos. Daiho assembled a team of 3,000 people. Scientists, engineers, construction workers, pilots. They came from every human world, all volunteers. The youngest was 19. The oldest was 72. Jiwan met with Daiho to plan. He spread maps of Vela Prime across a table. The planet looked dead even from space. Brown and gray. No blue anywhere. The magnetic field is weak, Daiho said, pointing. That is why it lost its atmosphere and water in the first place. We need to fix that, but that alone will take 100 years. So we cheat. How do you cheat at terraform work? Jiwan asked. Daiho grinned. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed impossible challenges. We do everything at once. We mine ice comets and crash them into the old ocean basins. We drill to underground aquifers and force them to the surface. We seed the atmosphere with oxygen-producing algae. We plant engineered trees that can survive in terrible conditions. We do all of it at the same time, and we do not stop until that world is alive or we are dead. People will die doing this, Jiwan said quietly. Yes, Daiho agreed. But people are dying now. The Vellani are dying slowly on those moons. At least this way we die trying to save them instead of watching them fade away. Jiwan thought of Thesh, of his cracked shell and tired eyes. When do we leave? 2 weeks. I will be ready. On the day before the fleet departed, Jiwan received a message. It was from Thesh. Someone had managed to get a communication relay to the Velani moon and taught them how to use it. The message was simple, translated by computer from clicking sounds to text. "We heard what you are doing. We do not understand why. We are grateful. Please do not let your people die for us. We are not worth it." Jiwon recorded her response carefully. "You gave water to a dying stranger. That makes you worth everything." She did not know if Thesh believed her. She did not know if this insane mission would work. She only knew that 3,000 humans were about to try to resurrect a dead world in 5 years. Because one old Velani had shown kindness to a stranger, the fleet launched on schedule. 15 ships carrying everything they needed to perform a miracle. As Earth shrank behind them, Jiwon stood at the window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, Thesh was working in dark mines, probably not believing that help was coming. Somewhere out there, a dead world waited to learn if it could live again. Jiwon touched the water container she still carried with her. "We are coming," she whispered. "We remember. We will always remember." The ships jumped to faster than light speed and humanity raced toward an impossible promise. Vela Prime looked worse in person than it did in the images. Jiwon stood on the bridge of the lead ship and stared at the dead world below. Brown dust covered everything. The oceans were gone, leaving behind empty basins like wounds in the planet's surface. Storms of dust swirled across continents, not a single patch of green anywhere. "Beautiful, is it not?" Daeho said beside her. His voice was dry. "It looks impossible," Jiwon admitted. "Good. I do my best work with impossible things." The fleet landed in what had once been the Velani capital city. The ruins were still visible under centuries of dust. Buildings made of carved stone, now half buried. Streets that once held water channels, now cracked and dry. A whole civilization buried under the evidence of environmental collapse. 3,000 humans set up base camp in the ruins. They worked fast, assembling prefab buildings and setting up equipment. Within 3 days, they had a functioning research station. Within a week, they had drilling rigs operating. Daeho called everyone together for the first briefing. 3,000 people crowded into the largest building, sitting on floors and equipment crates. "We have 5 years," Daeho said without introduction. "Traditional terraform takes 800. So we are not doing traditional terraform. We are doing everything at once and hoping the planet does not kill us." He brought up a holographic display of the planet. "Phase 1 is water. We need to crash ice comets into the northern ocean basin. That will give us a starting supply. Simultaneously, we drill to the deep aquifers. The water is down there, trapped in rock layers. We force it up. Phase 2 is atmosphere. We seed the air with engineered algae that produces oxygen. It will look terrible and smell worse, but it will thicken the atmosphere and give us something to breathe besides dust. Phase 3 is plants. We have genetically modified versions of ancient Velani vegetation. They can survive in terrible conditions. We plant millions of them and hope they take root. Phase 4 is weather. We try to trigger the first rain cycle in 1,000 years. If it works, we have a living planet. If it fails, we probably die." Someone raised a hand. "What about the magnetic field? If we bring water back but the magnetic field is still weak, the planet will just lose it again." "Yes," Daeho agreed. "That is a problem for year 10. Right now we focus on making this planet wet. We will worry about keeping it wet later." The work began immediately. Teams split into specialties. Jiwon led the comet mining operation. They flew into the system's outer regions where ice chunks drifted in the dark. They attached engines to the largest ones and aimed them at Vela Prime. The first comet took 3 months to move into position. It was nerve-wracking work. If the trajectory was wrong by even a small amount, the impact could cause more damage than good. They ran the calculations 100 times. On impact day, everyone stopped work to watch. The comet, a chunk of ice the size of a small mountain, fell toward the planet. It hit the northern basin at dawn. The explosion could be seen from space. A flash of light, then a cloud of steam and debris that spread across the horizon. When it cleared, a lake sat in the basin, small, muddy, and probably toxic. But it was liquid water on the surface of Vela Prime for the first time in centuries. 3,000 humans cheered until their voices gave out. Then they went back to work. One lake was not enough. They needed 10 more. The drilling teams, meanwhile, faced their own challenges. The aquifers were deep, sometimes 10 kilometers below the surface. The rock was hard. Equipment broke constantly in the dust storms. A woman named Minji led the botanical team. She worked with Velani scientists who had volunteered to help. One of them, A young Velani named Vera had ancient maps showing where the old forest once grew. The soil is dead, Vera explained through a translation device. Her clicking sounds became words in real time. Nothing will grow without preparation. Then we prepare it, Minji said firmly. They worked together, mixing nutrients into the dust, testing modified plants in small plots. Most of the plants died. Some survived a few days. A very few lived longer. Year 1 passed. They had crashed 3 comets and created 3 small lakes. The drilling teams had breached 2 aquifers, creating muddy streams that flowed for a few kilometers before sinking back into the dust. The air was slightly thicker. No plants had survived longer than 2 months. Progress, but not nearly enough. Year 2 brought disaster. A drilling rig hit an unexpected pocket of gas deep underground. The explosion killed 18 people instantly. 5 more died in the cave-in that followed. The project almost ended that day. People talked about giving up. About how maybe this really was impossible. About how no one would blame them for trying and failing. Daeho stood at the memorial service for the dead. He looked at the 23 names carved into a stone monument. Then he looked at everyone gathered there. They did not die for nothing, he said quietly. They died trying to bring a world back to life. That is a better death than most people get. We can honor them by quitting, or we can honor them by finishing what they started. No one quit. They went back to work the next day. Year 3 saw the first major breakthrough. The engineered algae finally took hold in the atmosphere. The sky turned a strange greenish color and smelled like rotting plants, but oxygen levels started to rise. People could spend short periods outside without helmets. Minji's team planted a modified version of the Velani water tree. It survived for 3 months, then 6 months. Then it was still alive at the 1-year mark, its roots spreading deep into the prepared soil. The Velani started to believe. More of them came from their scattered moons and asteroids. Not many, maybe a few hundred, but their presence changed everything. They worked alongside the humans, sharing knowledge of their world's history. Thesh arrived in year 3. He was older, his shell more cracked, but his eyes were bright when he walked through the base camp. Jiwon met him at the landing pad. They stood together looking at the northern basin. 3 lakes now, and the drilling teams had created 7 permanent streams. Not rivers yet, but flowing water at least. I did not believe, Thesh said through the translator. When you said your people would remember, I thought it was kind words. Nothing more. You gave everything, Jiwon said. This is what humans do when someone gives everything. Year 4 was frustration. They were running out of time and the planet was still mostly dead. Yes, there was water in the basins. Yes, the air was thicker. Yes, a few thousand trees were growing in scattered plots. But it was not enough. It was not a living world. Daeho became obsessed with weather patterns. He spent 18 hours a day running simulations, trying to figure out how to trigger rain. The problem was simple but unsolvable. Rain needed moisture in the air, but moisture evaporated quickly in the thin atmosphere. They could not thicken the atmosphere fast enough. We need a miracle, he told Jiwon one night. They sat in his office surrounded by holographic displays of wind patterns and pressure systems. We have been performing miracles for 4 years, Jiwon pointed out. We need one more. In the old ocean basin, now called the First Basin, Minji stood with Vera and looked at the muddy ground. The drilling teams had created a network of streams feeding into the basin. In a few more years, it might fill enough to be called a sea. My grandmother told me stories, Vera said. She said this basin was so full of water you could not see across it. Fish lived here. Plants grew along the shores. Our people would swim in the summer. It will be that way again, Minji promised. Will I see it? Vera asked. She was young by Velani standards, maybe 20 of their years, but her voice was tired. Yes, Minji said. She had no right to make that promise, but she made it anyway. You will swim here. I promise you that. Year 4 ended with cautious hope. They had 10 lakes now. Streams flowed across 3 continents. The air was breathable without helmets in many areas. Trees grew in patches across the former farmlands. It was more than anyone thought possible, but it was not enough. They had 1 year left, and Vela Prime was still a world of dust and mud. Beautiful in places, yes, but not alive, not yet. Daeho made his final calculations and called everyone together. I have a plan for year 5, he said. It is dangerous and might not work. If it fails, we could destroy everything we have built. Tell us, Jiwon said. He brought up the display. We detonate charges in the upper atmosphere while simultaneously releasing moisture from all the remaining aquifers. We create an artificial weather event, a massive one. If it works, we trigger the planet's first rain cycle. If it fails, someone asked. If it fails, we go home and tell people we tried our best. 3,000 humans looked at each other. Then one by one they voted. It was unanimous. They had not come this far to quit now. The final year began with preparation. Deho's plan required perfect timing and more luck than anyone wanted to admit. They had 3 months to set everything up. The charges had to be placed in the upper atmosphere at exact locations. Too high and they would have no effect. Too low, and they might damage the fragile air they had spent 4 years building. Engineering teams worked in dangerous conditions, flying through dust storms to position each explosive. Meanwhile, the drilling teams prepared every aquifer they had found. Hundreds of underground water sources, all ready to release at once. The amount of water would be enormous, but it would also drain resources they might need later. This was an all-or-nothing gamble. The Interstellar Council sent messages asking for progress reports. They wanted to know if the project would succeed. Deho sent back a one-word reply. Maybe. That was honest, at least. G1 spent the preparation months visiting different work sites. She saw the exhaustion on people's faces. 5 years of brutal work in terrible conditions. Some people had permanent lung damage from breathing dust despite the filters. Others had injuries that would never fully heal. Everyone was tired, but no one talked about quitting. They had come too far, done too much, lost too many friends. They would see this through to the end, whatever that end looked like. Tesh stayed at the base camp. He was too old for heavy work now, but he helped in other ways. He taught humans about Velani culture and history. He shared stories of what the planet had been like when he was young, before the final collapse. I was a child when the last river dried up, he told Jiwan one evening. They sat together watching the sunset. The sky was still dusty, but it had hints of orange and red now. My father carried me there to see it. He said I should remember what we lost. What did it look like? Jiwan asked. Small, Thesh said. Just a trickle by then. But it still flowed. Water going somewhere like it had purpose. I think about that a lot. Water with purpose. Soon, Jiwan promised. Soon there will be rivers with purpose again. Thesh's mandibles clicked softly. It was his laugh. You humans are strange. You believe impossible things and then make them happen. 300 Velani had come to watch the final attempt. They set up a camp near the base, wanting to be present for whatever happened. More watched from their scattered homes across the system, connected by video feeds. The night before the attempt, Minji could not sleep. She walked through the tree plantation she had spent 5 years building. Thousands of modified Velani water trees grew here now, their roots deep in prepared soil. They were not tall yet, just saplings really, but they were alive. Vera found her there, walking between the rows of small trees. You cannot sleep either? Vera asked. Too nervous, Minji admitted. What if it does not work? What if we destroy everything tomorrow? Then at least we tried, Vera said. My people had given up. We thought we were just waiting to go extinct. But you humans, you saw us dying and decided that was unacceptable. Even if tomorrow fails, you gave us something we had lost. What is that? Hope. The morning of the attempt, everyone gathered in the main control center. 3,000 humans and 300 Velani, all crammed into a space meant for maybe 500. No one cared about fire codes today. Deho stood at the main console. He looked calm, but Jiwan noticed his hands shaking slightly as he checked the systems. All charges are in position, someone reported. All aquifer teams ready, another voice said. Atmospheric readings stable. Deho pulled up the final sequence on the main display. Everyone could see it. A timer counting down from 10 minutes. At 0, the charges would detonate and the aquifers would release. Then they would wait and see if they had saved a world or broken it. Last chance to back out, Deho said. He was joking mostly. Do it, Jiwan said. 3,000 voices agreed. Deho started the countdown. 10 minutes felt like forever. People held hands, prayed to various gods or to nothing at all, checked equipment unnecessarily. Thesh stood beside Jiwan, his old shell perfectly still. The last minute counted down. 60 seconds, 45, 30. At 0, the charges detonated. The explosions were too high to see with normal eyes, but the cameras caught them. Brilliant flashes in the upper atmosphere, spreading energy in precise patterns. At the same moment, the aquifers released. Underground water trapped for millennia burst to the surface. Every stream they had created became a river. Every lake began to fill. Moisture poured into the atmosphere. Now they waited. The readings were chaotic. Temperature fluctuations, pressure changes, wind patterns that made no sense. The computers could not predict what would happen next because nothing like this had ever been done before. 1 hour passed, nothing, 2 hours. The readings were still wild but showed no sign of stabilizing. 3 hours. Some people started to look worried. Deho stared at the screens without blinking. 4 hours. The moisture levels were dropping, evaporating into space just like the old atmosphere had done. It is not working, someone whispered. 5 hours. 6 hours. Ji-won felt hope dying in her chest. They had tried. They had given everything. But maybe some things really were impossible. Then Vera, standing near a window, made a sound. A clicking gasp. Everyone turned to look. She was staring outside, her eyes wide. "What is that?" she whispered. In the sky above the Villani capital, clouds were forming. Real clouds, dark and heavy with water. They spread across the horizon like a living thing, growing larger with every moment. The control room erupted in noise. People shouting, pointing at readings that suddenly made sense. The moisture was not evaporating. It was condensing. Rising air was cooling. Water droplets were forming. The first raindrop hit the window at hour 7. Just one drop sliding down the glass. Then another. And another. Within minutes, rain poured from the sky. Not gentle rain, a storm. Water falling in sheets, drumming on the roof, turning the dusty ground to mud in seconds. 3,000 humans and 300 Villani rushed outside. They stood in the rain, faces turned up to the sky, mouths open. Some people cried. Some laughed. Some just stood there in shock. Ji-won found herself standing next to Thesh. Rain poured over his shell, washing away dust that had accumulated over days. He stood very still, his mandibles moving in that clicking pattern that meant wonder. "I never thought I would feel rain again," he said. His voice shook. "I am very old. I thought I would die under dust and stars. But here I am, standing in rain on my homeworld." The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of continuous rain. The first weather system Vela Prime had seen in over 1,000 years. The ancient riverbeds, dry for so long, filled with muddy brown water. The streams became rivers. The lakes became seas. When the rain finally stopped, the world was transformed. Water flowed everywhere. The air smelled clean. The dust had been beaten down into mud that would eventually become soil. Minji ran to her tree plantation. She had been terrified that the sudden rain would drown the young trees. But when she arrived, she found them standing tall, their leaves spread wide, drinking in the moisture. Vera was there too, touching one of the trees with gentle movements. In the old stories, Vera said, these trees would grow along riverbanks. Their roots would hold the soil. Their leaves would shade the water. I thought those were just stories, things that could never be real again. They are real now, Minji said. She was crying and did not care. Look, there is a stream there that was not there 3 days ago. In a few years, your trees will grow along its banks exactly like the stories said. More Villani arrived every day. They came in ships from scattered moons and asteroids, all wanting to see the impossible. Their homeworld, green and wet again, rivers flowing through ancient cities, rain falling from clouds. The news spread across the galaxy. Images of Vela Prime before and after. A dead brown world transformed into something that just might live. The Interstellar Council sent a formal message of congratulations. Deho read it once and deleted it. He was too busy planning the next phases. The magnetic field still needed work. The ecosystem was fragile. There were 1,000 problems to solve. But those were problems for later. Right now, Vela Prime had rain, had rivers, had hope. Ji-won stood at the spot where her ship had crashed 5 years ago. That seemed like a lifetime past. She was not the same person who had crashed here, dying of thirst. The galaxy was not the same either. She took out the old water container. Battered and patched, it had traveled across the galaxy and back. She walked to the nearest river, the one flowing through what had been the capital city. The river was not beautiful yet. The water was still muddy, still finding its course through ancient channels, but it flowed with purpose exactly like Thesh had described. Ji-won filled the container with river water and sealed it. This water had fallen as rain. It would evaporate, rise, and fall again. The cycle had begun. She found Thesh standing by the same river, watching it flow. "We did it," she said simply. You did it, Thesh corrected. My people offered you water. Your people returned rivers. No, Jiwon said firmly. You gave first. Everything that happened came from that first moment of kindness. You saved me, we just remembered. Thesh was quiet for a long moment. Then his mandibles moved in his. 25 years after the first rain, Vela Prime was unrecognizable. Rivers flowed through every continent. Forests of water trees covered the land in deep green. The oceans, while not as full as ancient records suggested they once were, held enough water to create weather patterns and support life. Fish swam in the rivers, descendants of ancient species brought back from genetic samples. The Velani population had grown to 2 million. They had come home from scattered moons and asteroids, from dying colonies and desperate outposts. They had rebuilt their cities, blending old stone with new materials. Children played in rivers that their grandparents had never thought would flow again. Jiwon walked through the capital city, now called New Thesh despite the old Velani's protests. She was older now, her hair gray, her body carrying the aches of too many years in difficult conditions. But she was alive. And she was here to see what humanity and the Velani had built together. The city was beautiful. Canals ran through the streets just like the ancient plans had shown. Buildings rose from the stone foundations of old structures. Markets bustled with activity. Velani and humans walked together, the partnership that had saved a world continuing in daily life. She met Vera at a riverside cafe. Vera was a full adult now, a leader among her people and a renowned expert in ecosystem restoration. She had dedicated her life to understanding how the new Vela Prime worked and teaching others to maintain it. I have something to show you, Vera said after they had ordered drinks. She pulled out a data pad and brought up an image. It was a young Velani child, maybe 5 years old, playing in a river, just splashing around enjoying the water without a care in the world. My daughter, Vera said quietly, born here on Vela Prime. She has never known a world without water. She thinks rivers are normal. Jiwon felt her throat tighten. That is beautiful. She asked me yesterday why our water trees are called that. She said all trees have water, so why are these special? Vera's mandibles moved in a sad smile. I did not know how to explain that these trees are special because they represent hope, that they are special because humans planted them when my world was dead. Maybe that is a good thing, Jiwon said. Maybe it means we succeeded. Your daughter lives in a world where water is normal, where the idea of a dead planet is just history. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past. The water was clear now, not muddy like those first desperate years. Plants grew along the banks. Fish jumped occasionally, catching insects. Across the galaxy, the Vela restoration had changed everything. The project had cost enormous amounts of money and resources. 37 people had died during the 5-year push, and hundreds more had suffered permanent injuries. But it had worked. A dead world had been brought back to life in a time frame that every expert had said was impossible. More importantly, it had created a template, a proof that worlds could be saved if people cared enough to try. Within 10 years of the first reign, humanity had launched similar projects on 6 other worlds. Not all of them succeeded. 2 failed despite years of effort. 1 succeeded partially, creating livable zones but not full restoration. 3 worked, bringing dead or dying worlds back to vibrant life. The pattern became clear. Humanity sought out struggling species, dying civilizations, and worlds in collapse. They offered help, not for profit or territory, but because they had learned something from an old Velani on a barren moon. Kindness should never be wasted. It became known as Thesh's Law, though the old Velani had protested that name too. The principle was simple. To those who give in their poverty, humanity returns abundance. Species that showed compassion even when they had nothing would receive everything humanity could give. Not everyone in the galaxy trusted this. Some species suspected tricks, hidden motives, or delayed costs. Humanity did not always convince them. But slowly, over decades, the pattern held. Humans would arrive, work themselves to exhaustion, sometimes die in the attempt, and then leave behind a better world than they had found. The galaxy's view of humanity shifted. No longer were they seen as aggressive, expansion-focused newcomers. They became known as the species that remembered debts and repaid kindness 1,000-fold. Of course, politics complicated everything. Some rescue operations became tangled in diplomatic problems. Some species refused human help out of pride or fear. Some projects failed despite best efforts, and those failures hurt. But the fundamental principle held. Humanity had proven on Vela Prime that they could save dying worlds. And they kept doing it. Daiho had died 12 years ago. He had pushed himself too hard for too long, and his body eventually gave out. But before he died, he had established the Institute of Advanced Terraforming, training new generations in the techniques developed on Vela Prime. Thousands of students studied there now, human and alien both, learning how to resurrect dead worlds. Minji still lived, though she was old and frail. She spent her days in the great forest she had planted, the one that now covered thousands of square kilometers. Young Velani and humans studied under her, learning how to coax life from dead soil. Thesh had died 8 years after the first rain. He had lived just long enough to see rivers flow through his homeworld and fish return to the oceans. Jiwon had been there at the end. His last words, translated through the device, had been simple. "Thank you for remembering." Now a monument stood where Thesh had first offered water to Jiwon. It showed 2 figures, one human and one Velani, sharing a cup of water. The inscription was carved in both languages. They gave everything. "We returned rivers. May all who pass here remember, kindness is never wasted." The monument had become a pilgrimage site. People came from across the galaxy to see it, to understand the story of how one act of compassion had changed the course of civilizations. On the 50th anniversary of Jiwon's rescue, a celebration was held in New Thesh. Representatives from hundreds of species attended. Some of them came from worlds humanity had helped restore. Others came to honor the principle that Thesh's law represented. Jiwon attended, though she moved slowly now and needed help walking. She was 93 years old, ancient by most standards, but still sharp-minded and determined to see this anniversary. The Velani had prepared something special. They led her to a river outside the city. This river had not existed 50 years ago. It had formed from the aquifer releases and rain cycles, finding its course through ancient channels. "We call it the Jiwon River," Vera said, walking beside her. "I know you told us not to name things after you, but we did it anyway." "You are all terrible at following directions," Jiwon said, but she was smiling. They walked along the riverbank. Trees that Minji had planted decades ago now towered overhead, their roots holding the soil exactly as the ancient forests had done. Birds sang in the branches. Fish swam in clear water. Velani children played on the banks, completely oblivious to the miracle they represented. At a quiet spot, they stopped. Vera's daughter was there, now a teenager, studying ecology like her mother. She approached Jiwon shyly. "Are you the human who was saved?" she asked through her translator. "Yes," Jiwon said. "My mother says you promised to return rivers. She says you kept your promise." "Many humans kept that promise," Jiwon corrected gently. "I was just one of thousands." The young Velani considered this. "But you were first. You were the one who remembered." Jiwon did not know how to respond to that. She looked at the river, flowing strong and clear. She thought about Thesh, long dead but never forgotten. She thought about all the humans who had worked themselves to exhaustion or death to honor a debt. She thought about the 37 names carved on the memorial for those who died during the restoration. "We remembered because we had to," Jiwon said finally. "Your grandfather showed us what we want to be, a species that helps strangers, that values kindness over profit, that remembers debts and repays them. He gave us that gift when he offered water to a dying human." The celebration that evening was enormous. Thousands of people gathered in the city center. Speeches were made in dozens of languages. Holographic displays showed the transformation of Vela Prime over 50 years. But the moment that mattered most was quiet. Jiwon stood at the monument alone for a moment and placed her hand on the carved image of Thesh. "We remembered," she whispered. "We will always remember." In the years that followed, Jiwon's health declined. She died peacefully at 97, surrounded by friends both human and Velani. Her last request was to be buried on Vela Prime, beside the river that bore her name. Thousands attended the funeral. They came from across the galaxy to honor the human who had received water and returned rivers. The eulogy was given by Vera, who spoke of debt and kindness, of impossible promises kept, and of a future built on the foundation of one old Velani's compassion. But the story did not end with Jiwon's death. It continued in every student who studied at the terraforming institutes. It continued in every rescue mission humanity launched. It continued in the Velani children who played in rivers without understanding how precious that water was. Most importantly, It continued in the principle that had been proven on a dead world brought back to life.